Hello, my name is Jason McIntosh, and I'm the gifted coordinator for the Washington Elementary School District and a private consultant. I'm here today to talk to you about some practical tips for encouraging your children to think critically and creatively while at home. Why is it important for parents to encourage critical and creative thinking? Well, what research shows is that 80% of the questions that are asked by teachers at school are lower level questions. In short, we would like to see more higher level critical thinking questions asked at school, but it doesn't always happen. Employers are looking for workers who can take risks and solve problems, not just recite information. So critical thinking and creative thinking are super important. And last of all, uh, gifted kids can become very bored and frustrated and unmotivated if they're not challenged, if they're not given an opportunity to express themselves creatively. I'm going to start with critical thinking. This little cartoon says, just go to www.criticalthinking.com and click on answers. It's exactly what we do not want to see. I'd like for you to take a minute right now and on a piece of paper, or if you're watching this with a friend, family member, write down your own personal definition for critical thinking. You have 53 seconds left. Okay, thank you very much. Now, this is one definition for critical thinking. There are many out there. I like this a lot. It says critical thinking is a conscious and deliberate process used to interpret or evaluate information. And that comes from the Middle School Journal. When we're trying to teach someone to think critically, there are particular skills that are involved in that process and some qualities that a person needs in order to take on the challenge of thinking critically, and they are listed here. The first at the top is inquisitiveness or curiosity. It's very important. Also, open-mindedness. If you're closed-minded, you might not dig as deep as you could or can, especially if you come across data that doesn't agree with your own opinions or thoughts about the topic. Systemic thinking is very important, being able to analyze and break things apart into smaller pieces. Having confidence is important, and a truth-seeking attitude. And cognitive maturity, very important. And let's take a look at what we can do as a parent to work with these and encourage those in your student or your child. So what you can do is to model your own behaviors. You're an expert thinker, and so you can model your own thinking for your children. Model curiosity, model analyzing, and your children will pick up on it. So where does critical thinking fit in with Bloom's taxonomy? If you're interested to know, you may know or not, I don't know. Bloom's taxonomy is a structure for thinking about all knowledge. And Benjamin Bloom created this many years ago, and it starts at the most low basic level, which is knowledge. Knowledge meaning my name, my birth date, my phone number. Understanding is when you've been exposed to something and you can explain how it works. Like if I said, explain the water cycle, that's understanding. Application is when you can use what you know to and apply it in the real world. So those are really important skills. but they're considered lower level skills. If you look at the top, we have analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Synthesis is all about creating something new, putting things together to make something new. Analysis and evaluation, however, those are the two pieces that fit very closely with critical thinking. Richard Cash, in his book, talked about several skills that you can teach students, or approaches to reasoning that really hit at critical thinking. Here are a few that you may be able to use with your own kids, and they're very simple, like comparing and contrasting. You could even say something like this to your children: how did this birthday compare to your last birthday? Tell me how they're like or similar. Then there's also sequencing and prioritizing. So you can say, okay, we've got a list of 10 places that we want to go for our spring break. So why don't you prioritize them from the most important to the least important to you? Then you have analyzing arguments, looking for, do you agree, do you disagree, that kind of thing. Relevant versus irrelevant information, telling the difference between the two is really important. Facts and opinions, investigating reliable and unreliable sources, very important for children, especially when they go online to do research and things like that, because many times what we see is that students will pull up their computer to do their homework and they just take the first answer that Google brings up. What we know is that most of the time that first site, that first source, is probably not the most reliable. There's a big difference between .com and .org and .edu, and so we can teach our children how to tell if this is a reliable source or if it's, just someone's opinion. Also, there's talking about what an assumption is, cause and effect, understanding point of view, bias and stereotypes, deduction and induction. All of these you can do with your own children, and a great way to have these conversations is to talk about these things related to your own child's personal interests. So, like I said, their birthday, or maybe they love soccer, so you could have them, sequence the how a soccer game begins. Um, there are many different approaches to this, but choose one, start small, and have some conversations, some informal, in the car while you're driving to school conversations, or to the grocery store even. Another great way to encourage critical thinking with kids is to play games. And there are so many wonderful games out there. We know chess is really very powerful for children's minds. So you got chess, you've got games like Blockus and Apples to Apples, you've got Tangrams, and got brain teasers and puzzles and logic problems, and so many wonderful games out there that are great for having fun with the family, but also teach critical thinking. NAGC, the National Association for Gifted Children, often puts out a best toys list once a year, usually around Christmas and Hanukkah, so that parents can, find the newest, hottest, best critical thinking games for kids. So check out the nagc.org for those kinds of resources. And as I mentioned before, children don't automatically know the language of thinking, meaning they don't necessarily know what an assumption is. They don't necessarily know when I say I think something versus I know something. And so you can model your own thinking with your children. And one of the great ways to do that is, let's say you're in the kitchen, and maybe you're cooking a meal, and you find out that you're missing one of the ingredients that you need for that recipe. Then your children can listen while they're doing whatever or helping out, and you can say, what should I do? I don't have any onions, so let's see. What I could do is check my spice drawer and see if I have any dried onion, or maybe I could substitute this or that or the other. So they get to hear what's going on in an expert thinker's mind um, while they're trying to solve a problem. And I also really like this quote at the bottom. It says, the emphasis should be shifted away from being right or correct and towards having reasons and evidence to support your ideas. And that's a very important idea, a very important concept to model for children. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about coming up with your thoughts and your ideas and being able to explain them and justify them. Now, not in all cases, of course, there are instances where there is a right answer versus a wrong answer, but many times there are multiple answers or solutions to a problem. When we're talking about modeling behavior, it's very important for you as parents to think about what you say to yourself out loud when you make a mistake or when something is hard for you. For example, if you're trying to do your taxes and you're having an issue and you just say, I can't do it. I just can't do it. It's just too hard. Well, that is what we call a fixed mindset. And that means that no amount of effort is gonna make a difference. That is meaning that you've given up. And what we want to model for children is having a growth mindset. And that is where you tell yourself, I can't do it yet. But with my taxes, I can't do it yet, but I'm going to go on, I'm going to Google it. I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm going to call a tax accountant. I'm going to call my friend, whatever it is, and you find a solution to it. You don't give up. Research shows that people who have a growth mindset do better. They continue to grow and they don't remain stagnant and give up. Another great thing you can do to encourage your child's critical thinking is just to feed their curiosity and their hunger for knowledge. If you think about a typical classroom, most kids come to school with a cup and they just fill my cup with knowledge, fill my cup with information. But oftentimes, many gifted kids come to school with a barrel, fill my barrel, because they're just have that insatiable sponge-like interest in the world around them. They want to absorb it all. And I also like the metaphor of the elephant. Gifted minds can consume large amounts of information in one gulp. Giving these children simple bits of information is like feeding an elephant one blade of grass at a time. Now, when I'm talking about you as a parent and feeding their interests and feeding their curiosity, it should be in things that they are curious about and that they enjoy. You would not want to on the weekends, if they have no interest in whatever it might be, architecture, drill them on architecture and expose them. Exposure is important, very important, because many times you don't know if you like something until you've had a chance to experience it. But you can also turn a child off to learning if it's not something they're interested in and it's just hammered and hammered and hammered. So be very judicious with this one, but feed their curiosity. If they show an interest in something, do everything you can to provide that exposure and that content for them. Another very important strategy for helping to encourage critical thinking in children is to make sure they have an opportunity to solve problems on their own. And we've all heard about the helicopter parents, and now they're what they call a snowplow parent. But what we need to do is not rush in right away if your child is having to solve a problem or hitting a hurdle. Now, you have to be, of course, very judicious and very mindful of the problem. There are some things that you do want to intervene with right away, but there are also some things that you can let them struggle a little bit. And oftentimes what you'll find is that they will figure it out on their own. The example I have here is a 4-year-old. So let's say you have a 4-year-old and there's a cookie up on that shelf and they see that as a challenge. Instead of going up and grabbing that cookie for them. See if they can come up with a plan. Of course, you don't want them to fall and hit their head, so you have to once again use wisdom. But you kind of get the point with what I'm saying. Let them try first, and then coach them along instead of doing it for them. So what we know is that the person doing the work is the one growing the dendrites in the brain. And our job is to help our students and our children grow the dendrites in their brains. Another thing you can do is talk about the habits of a scholar with your child. What this is all about is Dr. Sandra Kaplan from the University of Southern California. She began to ponder, what? Scholars, which in this situation we're talking about experts in a field, they do certain things, they have certain habits that have helped them become scholars. And if we can figure out what those are and teach them to children, then maybe we can help them become scholars as well. This is the list that she came up with. Pondering ideas, preparing ahead of time, having academic humility, saving ideas for later, like keeping a notebook. Oftentimes, I'll be working on a project and an idea will come to me about something else. And a scholar would say, before this great idea goes out of my head, I'm going to write it down and come back to it later because I need to focus on this, not this. Perseverance and not giving up, setting goals, being an intellectual risk taker, striving for excellence, and you have to be careful with this one. We don't want to create that overpowering sense of perfectionism, and then that can lead to underachievement because why try if I can't do it perfectly the first time? So just striving for excellence means you do your best. It doesn't mean we're talking about perfection in any way. Curiosity again, looking at things from multiple perspectives and using varied resources. So instead of just the internet, use a book from the library or interview a grandparent or watch a documentary on television or whatever it might be, using lots of sources. All of those are the habits of a scholar. So my advice to you would be to pick one of these and maybe throughout that month you focus on that, or you kind of bring it up, or you subtly plant that idea and remind them of that habit throughout that month. And then the next month you could choose a different habit. This is probably one of the best things that you can do to help your children develop critical thinking, and it's really to modify how you ask questions. And so in order to help kids understand this, I call it fat questions versus skinny questions. So if you look under the crane, skinny questions are not very meaty. So those would be lower level questions like, what is 2 plus 2? Or can you name the animal called man's best friend? Or list the characters in the story. There's not much meat to those questions. Whenever possible, change your skinny questions into fat questions, like that big gorilla there, orangutan, I think that is. So what we want to know is, here's some examples. Instead of saying what's 2 plus 2, what are all the ways you can create a mathematical equation that equals 4? It's much more wide open. How are dogs and cats alike or different? What if your nose were on the top of your head? So these have a lot of room for growth, a lot of scope for the imagination. Here's some other questioning do's and don'ts. These are things that we talk about with teachers, but there are also things that you can do at home. The first one is to reward the responding, not the response. Meaning, as maybe you ask a question and you're trying to figure something out, and your child gives you a complete, unhelpful, incorrect answer. That's okay. Just say, well, thanks for helping, or thanks for trying. Explain what open-ended means to kids. Accept all answers, even repeated ones. This is when, let's say you've you have three kids at home, and the older child says something that gives an answer to a question, and the younger one mimics the older one and says the same thing. That's great. That older child just modeled for the younger child. And ask questions that call for guessing. Guessing is great in certain circumstances, not in all circumstances, but guessing is risk taking, right? It's using what you know and trying to solve an unknown problem. Some don'ts. Don't just ask short answer questions that you have, one right answer. Don't be so serious, and lighten up and have some fun, and never ridicule a child for an unusual creative response. And these are things that you can ask one of these questions. Ask a question to your child on the way home from school, like I said, or on the way to church, or to soccer practice, or whatever it is. Ask them a silly question and see what they come up with. Here's another great way to apply this questioning technique. These are called "Was it possible" questions, and they do require a little bit of research, and that can be really fun for kids, but it should be something related to their interest, and it should be something really kind of quirky and fun. So here's some examples. Was it possible for Davy Crockett to send a letter via the Pony Express? So what the student would have to do, your child would have to, find a book or get on the internet or talk to their grandparent and see if they can figure out that answer. The answer to that question is no, was not possible. Question number two, an example, was it possible for Queen Victoria to fasten her gown with a zipper? The answer to that one is technically yes, but probably not. It was introduced at the World's Fair uh, right around the time Queen Victoria was approaching the end of her life. So it was possible, but not likely. And the last one, I'm going to leave it up to you to do some research on. Was it possible for William McKinley, our past president, to fly on an airplane? These kinds of things are fun and interesting for kids, and they become almost like a challenge to them. Here's another way to look at questioning. How would life be different if? So you could have them answer questions like, how would life be different if nothing ever fossilized? And then hear what they have to say. How would life be different if we had no moon? Or how would life be different if there were no shadows? Find a good, meaty question and pose it to your child. And here's another great way to do it. So imagine ask your child to mentally time travel into the future, and ask them to think about what life will be like in 2030, or you could even have them go back in time to the year 1800. For in this example, the year is 2030. You're a scientist who's been commissioned to make a human body that works better and more efficiently. What would you change and why? For example, would you add a third eye or wings? All right. So some of the things that we talked about for the critical thinking were to, switch up how you ask those questions, talk about the habits of a scholar, play those critical thinking games at home. A lot of easy things you can do to encourage critical thinking at home. Now I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about creative thinking. So I have two comics here. The first one says, which fairy tale would you like tonight? And the child says, how about the one you wrote on your tax return yesterday? And the second one says, the whole story is told from the point of view of the cheese, the mouse says to the editor, which is a cat. And lastly, this is my favorite. The father says to the child, no, you may not outsource your homework to India. That is definitely creative thinking there on the part of the child. Okay, so similarly, like we did last time, I would like for you to take 1 minute and write down or talk to the person, your family member sitting next to you. What is your own personal definition of creativity? All right. Thank you very much for participating. So, just like with critical thinking, there's no one right answer to what is creativity or creative thinking. There are many, many definitions. In its most simplest form, creativity is the generation of novel, which means like unique, useful ideas. What are the qualities needed to be creative? Well, first of all, as we said, creativity is best used when solving a problem. Then, when you have to be able to find the problem if you're going to be creative. Um, Also, inquisitiveness, just like with critical thinking, and persistence, because oftentimes the first time around you might not solve that problem. Maybe you're painting and a beautiful picture. The first time you're trying to get it right, you might completely mess up and have to paint over it and start again. But there are also four elements of creativity that I've listed here for you too, which are fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. And this is what those mean. Fluency means the number of ideas that you have. And obviously, when you're brainstorming or being creative, the more ideas, the better, right? Flexibility would be the type of ideas or the categories that your ideas fall in. So if I said things that are green and I listed um, cilantro, a frog, and a dinosaur, I could put the cilantro as a plant in one category, the frog and the dinosaur in a second category, which would be an animal. So that's flexibility. Originality would be no one else had the idea, and elaboration means you put lots of detail into it. Speaking of that, green and elaboration, when I've done an activity where I've asked students to list things that are green, and we sorted them out, and an elaborated idea versus an unelaborated idea, I had a group write down booger, and then another group wrote down green, slimy, sticky booger. And so an elaboration would be the green, slimy, sticky booger. All right, now let's stop for a minute, and I want you to see how creative you are. I have some puzzles for you to solve. So there's a 5-word phrase that this picture represents, and we're going to do this one together. So it's 5 words. You've got a dog, you've got 2 trees. One tree says right, and the other tree doesn't say anything. So it would be barking up the wrong tree. That's the phrase that they were looking for. So let's see how you do with a few more of these. 3 words. Blessing in disguise is the answer. 2 words. Heavyweight champion. 2 words. Busy bee. 4 words. Jack of all trades. All right. That was an example of a game that you could do with your kids that would help them be creative. And there really is only one answer to those, but it does make them think in a unique way to interpret those pictures in the way that you do to have to solve those. Okay, so where does creativity fit in with Bloom's taxonomy, which I mentioned earlier? For evaluation and analysis are the critical thinking, but synthesis would be the creative thinking. You put your knowledge together, you're applying it, but you're creating something new. You can look at creativity as 2 different forms. You can think about inventive creativity, where you're solving a problem and you're creating something that will be important to the world. But there's also expressive creativity, which would be like painting, or Maya Angelou and her beautiful poetry and her literature. So think about it in terms of inventive creativity and expressive creativity. Why aren't creative strategies taught more often in school? Well, there's a few reasons for that. First of all, creativity is undervalued, and we do have to focus a lot on content knowledge. And high stakes testing is something that really and can be overemphasized when we're looking at the trajectory of a child's life, and especially gifted children who are very capable of being very creative in their lives. Creativity is seen as the purview of the genius, which means when you think of creative people, oftentimes people think of, oh, they're a little wacky, they're a little insane, they're a little crazy. And no one wants to necessarily be wacky or crazy, right? We know that that's not true, but that is what people often think. There's a belief that creative strategies can't be taught. You're either creative or you're not creative. But what we know is that you can be taught how to be creative. There are big C creatives, which are people that are just born creative. It oozes out of them. They are in pain if they can't be creative. It's just a part of their DNA. But then there's little C creative, and that's the skills that you can teach someone. All right. Teachers don't have time to teach creative strategies because there are so many standards to teach. Is that true or not? I think that's a myth, because you can infuse creativity into a lot of things that you're teaching in the regular classroom. And there is a general concern that creative activities are fluff and extras, and you don't need them. It would be nice if we could, but they're not important. And that's not true. Why do we need to be more creative and teach creativity to our kids? Because, once again, it helps us solve problems. And our kids, your kids, are going to have to solve problems that we don't even know exist yet. So we need to equip them for the ability to do that. Students who participate in creative activities like drama and art and music and dance and all of that, they're more engaged in school. Students are engaged in creative thinking, develop complex and subtle aspects of the mind. That's from Michael Eisner, the former head of Disney. And creative students do as well in academic subjects as do higher IQ, less creative students. That's a research study. And I love this quote by Albert Einstein. He said, "I'm enough of an artist to draw freely upon my imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited, but imagination encircles the world." When do you use your creativity? A perfect time is when you're trying to solve a problem. And when a person hasn't learned or practiced solution ahead of time, you're going to have to use that creativity. And that Paul Torrance is a very important figure in the field of gifted education. He's known as the father of creativity, and sadly he's gone now, but his legacy remains. Some things that you can do to encourage your children to be more creative. You want to encourage intellectual and creative risk taking, and by that I don't mean physically hanging from a cliff or running out in the middle of the street in front of a car. We're talking about trying something new, getting outside of your comfort zone, and growing and stretching yourself in that way, intellectually and creatively. Some other things you can do is, remember to have fun and be creative together as a family. Legos are a wonderful way to encourage creativity. However, I would say, growing up, I had Legos, but I didn't have the kits. I didn't have the really cool, amazing, Harry Potter Legos or Star Wars Legos. I just had a bag of generic Legos. And that forced me to be a lot more creative than giving me a kit that I had to follow a book to put together. That, I think, would be more critical thinking because you have to read and analyze the text, look at the pictures, and put it together. But just giving them random blocks to build with, that's more creative thinking. Having a maker space at home. Maker spaces are areas where you can create, where you put odds and ends, like clean recycled materials or fabrics or whatever, and letting kids and you as well just build and make and create together. I'm going to the park, going outside and getting off the computer and not playing organized sports, but just playing on the playground the way we used to do as kids. Taking kids to places like the musical instrument museum and the art museum, exposing them to art and music and literature. Really, really wonderful and impactful things to do. Taking them to see plays and operas and all those kinds of things that we could do in a pre-COVID world, but they'll come back online soon and take advantage of those opportunities. And I know that the public library, the Phoenix Public Library, has a pass that you can check out. They're on demand, quite often gone by the time you are there to try to check one out, but they have free entrances to many of these places that you can reserve through the library. So check that out. Planting a garden and nurturing plants and painting and just having fun watching AFE at home or some fun, silly program that you can all laugh at and enjoy together. One thing it's really important to do is, as you're encouraging creativity, is to teach your children when it's okay to be creative and when it is not okay to be creative. It is not okay to be creative on AZ Merit or AZM3 or 2 or whatever it is now. So they need to understand when they can just use their imagination to go wild and crazy, and when they need to give the answer that's expected of them. And kids are really good at understanding that once you've explained it to them. And there's so many wonderful, creative children's books out there that you can read and enjoy as a family. This is one of my favorites. It's called Because I Could Not Stop My Bike and Other Poems by Karen Jo Shapiro. And what she did is she took the rhyme and cadence of poets like Shakespeare and Lord Byron and all of these amazing poets and authors, and she changed the words to make them fun and quirky and silly. So, for example, here we go. Lord Byron's poem, She Walks in Beauty Like the Night of Cloudless Climes and Starry Skies. She changes it to, she wakes up crying in the night, which keeps us all up very late. She screams for milk with all her might, then spits up everything she ate. Her diapers are a messy sight, so why does Mom insist she's great? So check out all the amazing literature out there. You can also teach your children the rules of brainstorming. Brainstorm things as a family, practice that. And what we know, once again, when you're brainstorming, the more ideas, the better. No discussion or comment. So what that means is, let's say your family is brainstorming a meal that you're going to cook, or you're brainstorming an idea for what to do with an empty spot in your backyard. And let's say one of your children says something, the other child pipes up and says, well, that's dumb, that would never work. That's when we would say, oh, no comment or discussion. Yeah, we're just listing all ideas. No ideas are bad ideas. And build on one another's ideas. We call that piggybacking. And oftentimes kids call that copycatting. And copycatting is not good, but piggybacking is different. That's when you take somebody's idea and you add something to it and expand upon it or tweak it in some way. That's piggybacking. You can also practice using SCAMPER with your kids. SCAMPER is an acronym. It stands for the words on your screen: substitute, combine, adapt, modify, magnify, minify, put to other uses, eliminate, reverse, or rearrange. I created my own little website for you so you can see some examples of each one of these letters. If you click in or type in your search bar scamper.site44.com, it'll take you there so you can see some examples of each one of those letters. But what you can do is have fun one evening scampering a teddy bear or a telephone or a pizza. So what could you combine with that pizza? We can combine a pizza with a sub sandwich, right? Or what could you eliminate? Well, you could take off the cheese from the pizza. What could you substitute? Instead of cheese, you could put baloney. I mean, there's so many ideas, and it can be quite fun to scamper things as a family. And then you can evolve it into something like this. Show them a silly, funny picture like this and say, tell me a humorous story. We obviously don't know what really happened here, but tell me what you think happened so that that man ended up pulling slices of tomatoes out of his wallet. And it's fun to hear what they have to say. Here's a game that you can do. All you need is a couple pieces of paper and a couple pencils or pens and a timer. And how this works is you would divide up your family if you have, and if you can, into two teams. If you only have one child, then you can just do it all together and not worry about the competition part of it. And you would say, work as a team to list and write down as many things as you can think of that are what? And it could be green, it could be red, it could be tall, it could be large, it could be small, whatever adjective you want to put or you want to put in there. Brainstorm as many as you can as a team for 2 minutes. And then once each group has their list after the 2 minutes has expired, then what you do is you go through and you count how many items are in each list, and they get a point for each item on the list. That's their fluency score. For flexibility, what you do is you work with your teammates to put all of your ideas into groups like animals, foods, places, people, whatever it might be, and count up the number of categories that you have and add that to your fluency score. And then you compare the lists and figure out what is on my list that's not on your list. And then you get a point for every item on your list that they didn't write down on their list. And you add that to your score. And then elaboration would be a very detailed answer. Instead of celery, if I wrote down a 10-inch long piece of wilted celery, that's an elaborated idea. And then the winner would be the team who has the most number of points. I'm going to kind of wrap up the creativity section here by reading to you a very, very short story. And I think it's a great reminder to us of how important creativity is. And it's called The Parable of the Sad Bear. Once upon a time, there was a very sad bear who was kept in a very small cage at the town zoo. When he wasn't eating or sleeping, he spent his time pacing, 8 paces forward and 8 paces back. Again and again, he paced the cage. One day, the zookeeper said, "It's sad to see this bear pacing back and forth. I shall build him a great open space where he can run and play." So he did. As the space was completed, great waves of anticipation charged through the town. Finally, the magic day came to move the bear to his headquarters. The mayor gave a speech as the children screamed with excitement. The town band played loudly as the great beast was moved to his new large space. Everyone watched as the bear looked to his left, then to his right, and began to move. 1 step, 2, 5, 8 paces forward, and 8 back again. To the shocked amazement of the crowd, he paced the parameters of his old, very small cage. Minds, like bears, grow accustomed to narrow spaces. One piece I would like to leave with you. Once again, my website is called notmoreofthesame.com. And one of the things you can check out there, I create a weekly publication, comes out about 3 or 4 times a month. It's called the Hotspot. The HOT stands for Higher Order Thinking Spot. Every issue is 3 pages long. It has a theme or an interdisciplinary topic. In this case, it's the evolution of animation. I create a comic in the beginning to introduce the topic. And then the last 2 pages are activities, fun projects that address that topic. Some did you know facts, a famous person called the bio profile that goes along with the topic, some career information, a virtual field trip, a mystery picture, a would you rather question, 3 project-based activities kids can choose from, a writing task, and a brain teaser, as well as a few other little things now and again. But if you're interested, you can find out more about the hotspot at my website. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, my name is Jason McIntosh, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Feel free to email me if you have any questions about anything I said. Thank you so much. Bye.